is not your presence here is not conditional on your attendance. It's important for your own learning. Now, this picture just simply describes the central problem of economics, and I guess you might have seen it in the notes, but if you haven't, if you've seen the content of the lecture, don't answer the question, but what do you think this is about, economics about? What does it show you? What's depicting here? Yes? Yes, shortage, yes, scarce resources, isn't it? So everyone is competing for scarce resources, shortage resources, and economics steps in here to alleviate that problem of shortage, or it actually deals with it. It deals with how we manage. Economics deals with how a society manages scarce resources. So I won't jump into the content right now. So let's go step by step. Now, this lecture, for this lecture, you need to enter that code now, 549736. To be able to see it in your laptop or on your internet-enabled device. Now, reading here is chapters 1 to 3, so they are chapter 2 as well, less important, but the first chapter is the most important for this topic. So read the first chapter at least. The third chapter is, to an extent, is also important as well. Learning objectives include scarcity, the choices, and opportunity cost. The topics of opportunity cost, this may not be new to you. But then for 90-something students who said they've never had economics before, it's possibly new. So try, if you know what we cover in these lectures, stay quiet and try not to check your social network, I mean your Facebook account or anything. So try to defer this activity to the end of the lecture, because you know what, if you look at Facebook, someone behind you will see your screen, and they will be distracted as well. So we are basically, without knowing, distracting others. This is something called externality in economics. This is uncompensated activity, or is basically is a loss imposed on others, is an expense imposed on others without us knowing that we are actually doing it. Yeah. So try not to send negative externalities to students that are behind you. So try to be quiet. Try to focus on the lectures. All right, so we'll also look at economic systems and the role of prices in directing market activities, and lastly we'll look at factors of production, but to a lesser extent. Now, simple economics. Imagine you live in an island, is a Robinson Crusoe island. No one else lives with you. Even the Indians, in actual story. In the story, Indians live alongside Robinson Crusoe, if you remember, if you read the book or the story. But here, you imagine that no one lives with you, and you have a sack of grain given to you, and nothing else. Now, you have two choices. Either to produce more grain, so you plant the seeds, use the grain as a seed, and then plant and then produce more, or consume the grain today. That's an interesting choice that businesses today face. And the question is, what has economics to do with this process? I hope we will be able to answer that question as we go on. In this case, choices are involved, and economics inherently deals with choices. And in fact, it deals with choices of limited nature. So here, your choice as islander is to either produce or consume it. If you consume it, the seed, what you will have, the grain, what you will have is basically less grain for producing more for future. But if you produce more, then you have less consumption today. So it's the trade-off between consumption and production that you'll be dealing with, and that's what economics tries to answer as well. And in this process, you are actually trying to address the central problem of scarcity. It's an economics problem. And there's a limited amount of grain that we want to make use of and sustain our life, for example, if we are on the island. And that's the process of economics. Scarcity is associated with factors of production usually. So that include labor, land, raw materials, and capital. These are factors of production. These are limited, very much limited. Labor, for example, is largely limited in many economies. Sweden needed a lot of labor. Germany needed a lot of labor force. Right after the World War II, if if I remember correctly, German government imported labor force from Turkey. That's why you have large diaspora of Turkish people in Germany now, or many other countries basically brought in labor because it was scarce at some point. Even today, central problem of economics is still being addressed by the UK government because they need doctors to work in NHS, fruit pickers to work in summer, seasonal workers. So you see the central problem is still persistent and we still haven't actually solved it in a way that it will be a sustainable solution, but it's not possible so far. Land is scarce. There were a few cases only where nations fought with each other not because of land. Most of the wars in the past were because of land and wealth, yeah? Raw materials, oil, gold, all these natural resources, right? So it's scarce. Now economics tries to address it in a peaceful manner rather than in a different manner, I should say. I don't want to say that. So capital is another. So capital, buildings. We are at this university very much lacking a capital, buildings, the lecture halls. We don't have lecture halls. That's why you are here in this great hall. It's not meant to be a lecture hall, but it turns out that we don't have large enough lecture halls that can house 300 students, although only 210 turned up today. So if this is persistent the case, we may as well move to a smaller lecture hall and let others use this lecture hall this time, for example, yeah? So this is one solution to the problem, obviously. So we're still addressing we're still dealing with scarcity, and our economists are still working. So economics is essentially the study of how society manages its resources, in fact, scarce resources. Now economics, as I said, has been evolving for the past more than 200 years now, and it has become too large to just say single economics being a subject area. So that's why we have macroeconomics and microeconomics. Now, some of you may know what it is. I mean, macro and micro. Just names, these labels also suggest you that macro looks at issues that are of huge importance for the economy, whole economy, factors or issues that are related to functioning of the whole economy. Micro is focuses on issues that are related to individuals, markets, industries. Yeah. So subsections of the economy, for example, or sectors of the economy, that's a micro issue. So in the second year, you will be offered a chance to study microeconomics, not macroeconomics, because you're business students. So in that case, you will go deeper into microeconomics. Now, briefly, what are the macroeconomic issues? Macroeconomic issues are questions or issues related to growth of the whole economy, economic growth, unemployment, aggregate level, the whole economy is unemployment level, inflation, so it's the level of prices rising is an inflation, for example, or balance of trade. This is a big topic these days, especially among the politicians. Balance of trade, the Brexit issue is about trade. If there was no trade, Brexit would have been done in a day. We wouldn't have had this problem because of the Brexit, because of the trade issues that the politicians are trying to resolve and trying to address and not coming to a common ground. Brexit is just being delayed. Obviously, the Irish backstop is one issue, but trade is the main one. And if you know, Boris Johnson has yesterday gone to New York to talk about trade and to lure businesses to the UK, for example. Yeah? So trade being a main issue, and that's a macroeconomics issue. And cyclical fluctuations. Sometimes you see this newspapers or BBC or Sky News, if you're watching news, business news, they talk about potentially harmful effects of Brexit, inducing recession, for example, in the UK or affecting EU businesses. So these are cyclical fluctuations that we always deal with, or 2008 crisis, for example. These are issues that we look at in macroeconomics because they look at whole economy. Now, microeconomy looks slightly differently. So it looks like I included a few slides here. So these are the indicators, macroeconomic indicators that we looked at before. And now, in this slide, now you have a time series of inflation growth and other aggregates. And you can see that the spikes of inflation, the brown line, indicate that there must have been a recession in that period, yeah, in the 80s. In fact, there was the oil embargo, so OPEC, Saudis imposed the embargo on Britain and on the West, so that increased the oil prices. Oil prices usually feed into your consumption good prices because oil is an input for many, many things other than just petroleum. Yeah? Petroleum is just a product of oil, crude oil, but oil can be used, is actually a source of many derivative products usually. Or look at the fiscal deficit of the 40s. You can see this here, fiscal deficit of the 40s here. That is during the World War II. Fiscal deficit refers to the situation where the government is spending more than what it earns. Governments earn usually by taxing. And in World War II, businesses were converted into, factories were converted into weapons factories, yeah? Business factories, the consumer goods supply factories were converted to weapon manufacturers, tank manufacturing. And then these were paid for by the government, and government didn't collect taxes as a result. So that meant government was spending more than what it was collecting, so there was a deficit. There was a shortage of funds as well, so that went up. So then on the left-hand side, the y-axis is actually is a ratio, percentage rate, or is a fraction of GDP. So it's the deficit being the fraction of GDP has gone up so much, 25% now. Now, as you can see, we got better over time in managing our economy. So we can see that after the 80s, there was little spike or chaotic process. It's just, even if there was this non-constant movements, we have a constant mean here, yeah? So there's little deviation away from the mean point. Now, this is another macroeconomic issue, the general government fiscal indicators here. You can see that the budget balance, it's about the deficit and also amount of funds that governments borrowed here, debt. Now, you can pick your country if you're from Europe here. It's the European Union countries list here. You can see how well your government has done in managing your finances. In fact, you ought to install these governments to help the governments to gain power, and then governments are responsible for managing your finances, because every taxpayer should be really looking at these figures before the election and say, okay, in 2003 and 7, in Greece, we had a huge debt. It's almost, you know, if the Greece GDP was, let's say, 10 billion, they actually borrowed 10 billion every year, in other words, yeah? So it maintained 10 billion debt instead of paying off. So it's like you earn £2,500 a month from your job by working, right? And also just you pay off this amount, yeah? So that, it's a bad analogy, but it tells you that if Greece wants to pay off its debt in 1 year, it would have to pay off by just not eating anything in 1 year. So it would have just sold every product that it produces and then pays off the debt, yeah? So that 102% means basically debt over GDP as a ratio, yeah? So that's as a bad indicator of Greece struggling with its economy. And good economies like Romania, yeah, so these economies managed to pull off very well in the crisis as well, because there was less, these economies weren't exposed to certain things that globalization brought about eventually. The housing crisis and things like this, that didn't affect them. Now, what are the microeconomic issues? Microeconomic issues deals with individual level or market level or industry level or sector level, let's say, issues such as, it deals with choices in terms of production choices and technologies of producing, so what to produce and how to produce and to whom or for whom to produce these things, yeah? But these choices also have implications. Look at this image. If we choose to industrialize, what would be the result? Result will be that environmental catastrophe will kick in, because all this industrialization requires oil consumption, requires carbon, basically natural resource consumption. That depletes the resources of the earth. So, however, at the same time, since we're depleting natural resources, we're cutting trees and at the same time to get a beautiful cities and urban structures, right? So there are implications that we need to consider as microeconomists or as good citizens as well. So it's a microeconomic issue, basically. Market failure, for example. In this case, we're looking at the topic of externality. Notice what happens here. These factories are emitting all this smog. But are they really paying for this smog? This smog doesn't actually disappear into thin air. It stays within the Earth's atmosphere. It doesn't go into space because space doesn't suck it. If it does, we would have been dead by now because, you know, the air would have been sucked out. So what that means is that all the smoke here you can see will be remaining with us. And when it rains, you would feel like it's raining acid, acid rain. You could taste rain even today in the cities. You could see that the petroleum fumes that rose into the air would come back in the form of rain, or it will heat up eventually the atmosphere or the Earth. So that's why we call it climate change or global warming. And that's a microeconomic issue usually. It's an issue that we have to tackle locally by changing our technical mix or the technology here. Instead of using our oil-powered machines, maybe we use electricity-powered machine. Electricity should be generated, let's say, with the wind power or the nuclear power, for example. Yeah. So these are choices and their implications that we'll be looking at in microeconomics in this course. And also another microeconomic issue, and which is also a very important one, is opportunity cost. Right. So you are here going to be here for 1 hour, right? What's the cost of that staying here? That opportunity? Have you thought about it? The direct costs are probably very meager. I mean, you won't even feel what the direct costs are, right? But opportunity cost is a big one. You're giving up a benefit of sleeping. Like I can see someone yawning, so that person would have benefited better by sleeping in that hour. Yeah. So that benefit of forgone sleeping or given up sleeping time is the opportunity cost of attending this lecture. But then, this obviously you will be comparing the trade, you're looking at the trade-offs, which will be the next topic. In the next slide, I'll come to that in a bit, but I'm trying to explain you what opportunity cost now. So opportunity cost is whatever you give up in order to do the activity that you're doing right now, for example. Yeah. So the company is facing alternative options. Usually look at the opportunity cost in addition to the direct costs. And there's a simple example of opportunity cost being real is that you just remember the old adage, there is no lunch, such thing as free lunch. That tells you that even a free lunch costs you something. Yeah, it's going to take some effort that could have been directed at doing something else while you're having the lunch. Yeah, right. So that's an opportunity cost concept that we will be using quite often in this course. Now, rational decision makers, as you are. I'm sure you are the rational decision makers because you chose Queen Mary, not something else, some other course. Most likely thing you've done is that you compared the benefits of doing a business management course here and also not doing it. And you decided to do it at Queen Mary's. Probably the benefits were heavier, or in other words, more than the costs, I suppose. So you are thinking at the margin here. Doing a course, additional course, on top of your school certificates, for example, or school qualifications, or what you call this, on top of what you've done so far in high school. Now, think of doing an MBA now. That one additional step is going to cost you money as well, right? It's going to take up some of your resources and also your time. But then there are also benefits. In addition to resources like the tangible monetary costs, there are also benefits that additional MBA course could bring is that higher wages in the future, or a utility of having an MBA, or is kind of prestige that it brings to you. Especially if you do it at a good school, it brings the prestige and you gain utility, that you gain this sort of satisfaction from doing MBA, for example. Yeah, so you have to be comparing then as a rational decision maker benefits with the costs and then take the steps or make the decisions. Yeah, so that's a rational decision making process for you. We always think at the margin as a rational decision makers, and I suppose you've done the same thing as well in your decision to a course. And now we also look at incentives. Markets have incentives for people, and usually costs and benefits change usually, and when we compare them, we make a decision. But at some point, these costs and benefits change. We then alter our decisions as well, because based on the changes that we've seen, incremental changes, we will also assume that there are incentives. So let's look at this case here. Everyone knows who this, who this person is? So you're not interested in music, pop music. Yes. She's a very well-known star, Lady Gaga. She's the unique one among the pop stars. She's so incentive in doing so. She's so benefits of doing so. She would have as well decided to just go ahead and then sing in normal outfits and walk in as normal, as normal as the other singers are. But she decided to go with this fashion. I don't know that she invented this sort of fashion, and she has a house, a Lady Gaga house or something, where the designers work on her outfit now. So she's so incentive. So she was incentivized to do this, sort of to go with this image, because she thought there's a greater benefit than being simply a normal singer, pop star. It would bring more, it would catch more attention, and she would actually appeal to certain sections of the society as well. So in this, she saw incentives, and then she decided to do. It's similar to business, doing business. If you are incentivized doing certain things, certain business actions, then you must be you must be operating in a free market economy. And one of the signals that show us incentives are the prices. In free markets, we'll talk about what free market later, prices are good signals. They operate as signals for us, and with these signals, prices usually direct our activities, in other words, market activities. And prices usually guide our decisions. And so as a consumer, we are mostly driven by prices as well. We compare the products not only by their quality, also by their prices as well. Businesses usually do the same thing. They look at the prices. If the apples are more expensive this year, you will see that the farmer will grow more apples for next year, thinking that the price will remain as high as it was last year, right? So that he's being driven by prices, incentivized by the prices, or many other factors. But basically, these will be the incentives. So tax, for example, is an incentive. Subsidy is an incentive mechanism that governments usually impose on businesses. Now, economists think with models, or they like modeling the economy. Basically, economists like creating an imaginary economy before they analyze them. So here, we think of households or the home sector as the consumers, and businesses as the producers here. This is the market sector. You can think of this as a market. And what happens is that goods and services travel from market to the households, and households buy them. So the funds in the red line here, through the red line, along the red line, goes funds to the market sector. Using these funds, then businesses invest in labor, pay wages, so rent the buildings, build buildings, and pay dividends to the households. And households, in return, provide the factors of production, the labor, the machines, the buildings, and so on and so forth. This is a circular flow of economy that economists think of. Whenever we model the economy and we want to study the economy, we think of this process before we actually study it further. Now, we will also look at these individual elements of the circular flow model. Now, in this model, the size of the flows, the labor moving, factors of production moving, labor, capital, and land moving towards the market, and also the payments back to the households is basically a macroeconomic issue, the amounts of these flows. And then the microeconomic issues are the individual level issues that are related to goods and factor markets, that are choices of production. For example, what we could produce is a microeconomic issue, or the how much labor should be I could provide, for example, to earn money, right? So these issues are microeconomic issues, and choices within goods and factor markets involve microeconomic issues. So we'll be studying this in due course as we progress. Do you have any questions? No. If no, for next week, for some reason my question, this question functionality is not active here. I would usually have question functionality working alongside the slides, but this time I don't see any of that working, so I'll have to fix it. For next lecture I will fix it. I understand that you may be sitting at the balcony or at the back and you don't want to ask questions, then you could type your question and it pops here. But for some reason it's not working now. If you see a box where you could type, do try to type and ask question. But since it's not showing here, I suppose it's not available for you. Now, economies work independently, usually free of government control, but government's intervention is not avoidable. So, as a result, we have over years, over decades, over centuries, we have economies evolving with the intervention of the government. So, communist economies is where the government controls the economy 100%. It's the only agent in the economy responsible for allocating resources. In the capitalist economies, the agents are not governments. It's the businesses and the consumers themselves make the decisions. Businesses decide, for example, businesses decide to open a business, for example. I mean, individuals decide to open a business, or to have London Eye, for example. Government probably just allocated the land for London Eye, but private businesses invested in it. And also the Tesco, for example, Tesco shop. It's here because 125 years ago, probably about that time ago, a guy called Cohen decided to open a the penny shop. Today we call it pound shop, yeah? Penny shop. Now it's a Tesco store. You see, the decisions are made in capitalist economies by individuals. In communist economies, government decides to open the shops. They will decide number of shops and type of shops that the society would need. So it's basically they are imposing some sort of restrictions on individuals as a result. And there are also mixed economies. Now here you can see some infographics of economies currently operating in about 2010, around 2010. So top line here, the yellow dots show you where the economy was of each country in 80s. And here the green ones show where these economies are currently in the 2010s, currently basically. So you can see that North Korea in the 80s was almost totally planned economy. It was a communist economy, and government decides what to do basically with the resources. And unlike that, Hong Kong back then was the most free market. Hong Kong is still a free market, but is not necessarily right now, I suppose, with the events going on right now. China was somewhere towards the planned economy, but now it has liberalized, and Chinese success is a very good one. And we'll talk about that at some point. They now have a mixed economy. Government still plays a big role there, even when the individuals are free to conduct a business. Yeah, USA we say it's a free world, but it's not totally free. Hong Kong is much more free apparently. Yeah, so we'll look at these cases as well on the go. So this will be input into our lectures. Now, markets we say should operate on their own, but they usually fail as well. In the markets, in free markets, prices guide or direct us towards profitable activities. As an entrepreneur, you go and start a business because it probably is profitable to you, and you compare the marginal costs with marginal revenues of doing additional business. That's because of prices. Yeah, if an item is selling at a low price, you think, okay, it's already populated industry. It's like young fashion, for example. Yeah, young fashion is booming in the UK. The stores, for example, Zara, H&M, Topshop, these are young fashion, one of the few industries that are actually booming. Now, because the prices are maintaining, they are not going down that fast, new entrants are also coming into the market. So the price is guiding these businesses to start a business in the UK, right? So this is the characteristic of a free market economy. But at some point, we realize that markets may not be good at allocating resources. young fashion is a good example, but there are other examples where markets fail. In the young fashion case, markets fail as well when the businesses do not take into account the externality they're causing. In the UK, there's little effect in terms of externality, negative externality by the young fashion businesses, because most of what they produce takes place in or imported from China and other countries. So their effects are actually on others, imposed on others. Externalities are imposed on others elsewhere. So market failures do happen in some cases because of externalities. These are uncompensated impacts of individuals or firms on others who are not related or directly linked to the process or the businesses, yeah? So externalities, like you're driving a car, your emissions, for example, is actually externality imposed on people who live on this main road, for example. Yeah? You're driving, and then, I mean, I used to live on a main road flat, and after a year, my room's wall was dark. I could actually wipe off the fumes from my walls. I didn't realize it until I was about to leave, when I saw a white mark my son kind of apparently made by rubbing his fingers on the wall. And I could see his fingers basically removed the fumes of this bad effects. Now, it's the end of, we need to leave and give the space to others. It's, I guess that was the last slide. So please read the materials, lecture materials for next week, and try to do the problem sets, yeah? And we'll do your problem sets starting next week. Any questions, drop me emails, and thank you.